There's a moment when everything changes. For two little girls standing barefoot in a cemetery parking lot, that moment came when the last person who loved them was lowered into the ground. Today, I'm bringing you a story about what happens when the most dangerous man in the city meets two children with nothing left to lose. Welcome to Afro-Korean Narratives. Let's begin. The dirt was still fresh on the grave when the landlord changed the locks. Nyla found out because she tried the key 3 times. 3 times, the brass caught and refused to turn. She stood on the apartment stoop with her little sister Bree pressed against her hip, both of them still wearing the black dresses the church ladies had zipped them into that morning. Bree's was too long. The hem dragged through a puddle, and the 5-year-old didn't even flinch. She just clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter and stared at nothing. "Nyla?" Bree's voice came out like air leaking from a tire. "Why won't the door open?" Nyla didn't answer. She was 9 years old and already learning that some questions had answers too heavy to carry out loud. She pressed her forehead against the door. The wood smelled like the pine sol her mama used to mop with every Sunday. That smell hit her harder than the funeral had. Her throat locked. Her eyes burned. But she didn't cry. Bree was watching. Bree was always watching. "We're gonna go see Auntie Zara," Nyla said. She took her sister's hand. "But Mama said Auntie Zara works nights. She might be sleeping." "Then we'll wait." They walked. 2 blocks turned into 6. 6 turned into 12. Bree stopped asking where they were going around block 8. Her little legs just moved because Nyla's hand kept pulling. The stuffed rabbit's ear dragged along the sidewalk, collecting dirt and gum and city grime, and Bree didn't notice. The sun pressed down on their necks. No one stopped. No one asked 2 little girls in funeral dresses why they were walking alone through the east side at 2 in the afternoon. Now, if you're new to Afro-Korean narratives, welcome. You picked a story that's going to stay with you. If you've been here before, you already know we don't hold back. Hit that subscribe button, tap the bell so you never miss a story, and drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. Now, let's get back to these girls. Because what happens next is something nobody saw coming. 12 blocks, that's how far they walked before Bree sat down on the curb and wouldn't get up. Right outside a restaurant with Korean letters on the awning, and the smell of garlic and sesame pouring through the vents. Bree pulled her knees to her chest and pressed her face into the rabbit. "I'm tired, Nyla." "I know." "I'm hungry." "I know." "I want Mama." Nyla sat down next to her. She put her arm around Bree's shoulders. The fabric of both their dresses was damp with sweat. Nyla looked up at the sky, like she was searching for something. Then she looked at her little sister and said the first lie she'd ever told on purpose. "Mama can see us right now." She said to keep walking. She said Auntie Zara's gonna take care of us. Mama hadn't said any of that. Mama hadn't said anything at the end. The machines had said it all for her. Beeps getting slower. Then one long tone that sounded like the whole world flatlining. The restaurant door opened. He didn't come out fast. He stood in the doorway like a man deciding whether to step off a ledge. Tall, lean, a dark navy suit that fit like it was sewn onto his frame. Silver streaks at both temples cutting through black hair that was pushed back and precise. His jawline looked like it had been carved with intention. But it was his left hand that Nyla noticed first. The skin from his wrist to his knuckles was rippled and shiny. A burn scar. Old. the kind that came from grabbing something on fire and refusing to let go. Park Seo-jin was 42 years old. He ran the restaurant as a front for a network that controlled shipping routes, private gambling rooms, and half the commercial real estate east of the river. He had 17 men who would take a bullet for him, and 3 who had already tried. He hadn't smiled in 3 years. Not since the fire. He looked at the 2 girls on his curb, and something behind his ribs shifted. He didn't show it. His face stayed flat. His eyes moved from Nyla's protective arm to Bree's rabbit, to the funeral dresses, to the bare feet. Bree's shoes had given her blisters by block 4. Nyla had carried them until block 9, then left them on a bench because her arms were shaking. "Where are your parents?" His voice was low, controlled. The accent sat underneath his English like a current beneath still water. Nyla's arm tightened around Bree. "We're fine." "You're sitting on my sidewalk in funeral clothes with no shoes." He didn't say it mean. He said it the way a doctor reads a chart. Facts. "We buried our mama today." Nyla lifted her chin. Her eyes were dry and fierce, and 9 years old, and completely terrified. "We have nowhere to go." 6 words. 6 words that cracked something open in Park Seo-jin that he'd spent 3 years welding shut. He stood there. The restaurant noise spilled out behind him, dishes clinking, Korean being spoken fast and low, a television playing a baseball game nobody was watching. He looked at Nyla, then at Bree, then at the rabbit with the dirty ear. He stepped aside and held the door open. "Come eat." Nyla didn't move. "My mama said don't go with strangers." Seo-jin looked at her for a long time. Then he crouched down. His knees popped. He was eye level with the 9-year-old now. That close, Nyla could see that the burn scar crept up past his wrist, disappearing beneath his sleeve like a secret he wore every day. "Your mama was smart," he said. "But you're hungry. Your sister's tired, and it's going to rain in 20 minutes. He nodded toward the sky. Clouds had been stacking all afternoon. "There's rice and soup inside. No one's going to hurt you. When you're done, I'll drive you wherever you need to go." Bree lifted her face from the rabbit. Her cheeks were streaked with dried tears and sidewalk dust. She looked at the man with the burned hand and said, "Do you have juice?" The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, not yet, but the closest thing to one that had crossed his face in 3 years. "I have juice." Bree stood up. Nyla grabbed her arm. "Nyla," Bree said, and there was something plain and tired and final in her voice. "I'm hungry. Mama can see us. You said so." Nyla's own lie walked right back to her. She looked at the man. He hadn't moved. He hadn't reached for them. He hadn't raised his voice. He just held the door open and waited, like he had all the time in the world, and none of the patience for pretending. They walked inside. The restaurant was warm and smelled like sesame oil and ginger, and something sweet that Bree couldn't name. A woman behind the counter stopped mid-sentence when she saw them. 2 men at a corner table looked up from their phones. One of them started to stand, but Seo-jin raised a hand without looking, and the man sat back down. He led them to a booth in the back corner. The leather seats were dark red. Bree climbed up, and her feet didn't reach the floor. She set the rabbit on the table like a dinner guest. Seo-jin said something in Korean to the woman behind the counter. She moved fast. Within 3 minutes, there was rice, soup, grilled fish, pickled vegetables, and 2 glasses of orange juice on the table. Bree drank half her juice in one pull. Nyla stared at the food like it might be a trick.
"Eat," So-jin said from across the table. He sat with his hands folded. The burn scar was hidden now, tucked beneath his other palm. Nobody's watching. Nyla picked up a spoon. She tasted the soup. It was warm and salty and had soft tofu floating in it. And the warmth spread through her chest like someone had turned a light on inside her body. She ate. Slowly at first, then faster. Bree was already on her second bowl of rice, scooping it with a spoon because she didn't know how to use the chopsticks. And nobody corrected her. So-jin watched them eat and didn't touch a thing himself. His phone buzzed 4 times. He ignored it 4 times. The woman behind the counter watched from the kitchen doorway. The 2 men at the corner table pretended to look at their phones, but their eyes kept drifting. When Bree finished, she leaned against Nyla's shoulder and closed her eyes. Asleep in under a minute. The rabbit pressed between them like a third passenger. Nyla looked across the table at the man who had fed them. Her eyes were harder now. Full, not grateful, not yet. Assessing. "What's your name?" she asked. So-jin. "That's not American." "No." "What are you?" He considered the question like it had more weight than she intended.
Somebody who knows what it looks like when the whole world falls out from under you. Zara got the call at 4:47 in the afternoon. She was elbow deep in Mrs. Patterson's bedsheets at Mercy Lane Assisted Living, turning a 91-year-old woman who weighed less than the laundry cart. Her phone buzzed against her thigh. She ignored it. Buzzed again. Ignored it. Third time, she stripped off one glove and looked at the screen. Unknown number. She almost let it ring. Almost. But something in her chest pulled. The same something that had been pulling since her sister Denise's funeral that morning. The same something that told her the 2 nieces she'd kissed on the forehead and promised to come get after her shift were out there somewhere, without a key, without a home, without their mama. "Hello? Is this Sarah Coleman?" "Who's asking?" A pause. Then a voice with an accent she couldn't place, not quite foreign, not quite familiar. Controlled, like every word had been weighed before it left his mouth. "There are 2 girls in my restaurant. The older one says you're her aunt. She's been trying to reach you for 3 hours." Zara's hand tightened on the phone, her knees almost buckled. She caught herself on the edge of Mrs. Patterson's bed rail. "Where? What restaurant? Are they okay? Who are you?" "They're safe, they've eaten, the little one is asleep." He gave her the address. "Come when you can, there's no rush." The line went dead. Zara stared at the phone, her hands were shaking. She pulled off the other glove, told her supervisor she had a family emergency, and was in her car in 4 minutes. The drive should have taken 20. She made it in 11. Every red light felt like a personal insult from the universe. She pulled up to the restaurant and sat in the car for 10 seconds, just breathing. The sign above the door had Korean characters she couldn't read, and smaller English letters underneath that said Han Oak. It looked clean, quiet, not the kind of place 2 little girls in funeral dresses should be sitting on a random afternoon. Zara was 26 years old, 5'5". Her natural coils were pulled back in a bun that was already coming loose from the day. She had her sister's eyes, wide set, dark brown. The kind that saw through nonsense and didn't blink. She was still wearing her scrubs from the nursing home. Light blue, with a coffee stain on the left pocket that she'd stopped caring about around hour 6. She had bags under her eyes that no amount of concealer could fix, because she'd been sleeping 3 hours a night since Denise got bad. Since the hospital. Since the machines. Since the flat tone that still rang in her ears like tinnitus. She walked in. The restaurant was quieter now, the after-lunch lull. 2 men still sat in the corner booth, scrolling phones. A woman wiped down the counter. And in the back booth, in the dark red leather seat, Bree was curled up sleeping, with her head on Nyla's lap and the stuffed rabbit pressed against her chest. Nyla saw Zara first. Her face broke, just for 1 second. The armor cracked, and the 9-year-old underneath came flooding through, and she whispered, "Auntie Zara," in a voice that was half relief and half accusation. Because where were you? Where were you when the door wouldn't open? Where were you when we had to walk 12 blocks? Where were you? Zara crossed the restaurant in 5 steps. She slid into the booth and pulled Nyla against her, and Nyla finally cried. Quiet, shaking, muffled against Zara's scrubs. Bree didn't wake up, but her hand found Zara's arm in her sleep and gripped. Zara held them both, and the tears on her own face were silent and steady, and she didn't wipe them because both hands were full of children. She felt someone watching. Sojin stood near the kitchen doorway, arms at his sides. He hadn't moved to interrupt, hadn't said a word. He just stood there, the way a man stands when he's watching something he recognizes, something he's lived, something that carves a hole in the center of your chest that never quite fills back in. Zara looked at him over Nyla's head. "You fed them?" "They were hungry." "You called me?" "The older one had your number memorized. Smart girl." Zara swallowed, her jaw tightened. She wasn't good at owing people things, never had been. Denise used to say Zara would drown before asking someone to throw a rope. Stubborn past the point of survival. Proud in a way that sometimes looked like self-destruction. "Thank you." It came out stiff. Not ungrateful, uncomfortable. Like the words were a size too small for what she actually felt. Sojin nodded once. He pulled a chair from a nearby table and sat at the end of their booth. Not in it, at it, keeping distance. His posture was straight, hands resting on his thighs, the burn scar visible now in the overhead light. "The little one told me your sister died." "Today." Zara's voice fractured on the word. She cleared her throat. "We buried her today." "And the apartment?" Zara's eyes went sharp. "What about it?" The older one said the locks were changed. Zara's jaw worked. She looked down at Nyla, who had gone quiet against her chest, still awake, listening. Always listening. "That's between me and the landlord." "Where are you taking them tonight?" The question landed like a brick through glass. Because Zara didn't have an answer. Her own apartment was a studio, 400 square feet. No second bedroom. No bed for 2 girls. She'd been telling herself all week that she'd figure it out after the funeral. After. As if grief came with a schedule. As if the world would pause while she buried her sister. And then politely wait for her to catch her breath before throwing the next punch. "I'll figure it out." Sojin studied her, not with judgment, with recognition. He knew that sentence. He'd said it himself. 3 years ago, standing in a hospital hallway with his daughter's name still on the wristband they'd handed him in a plastic bag. "I'll figure it out." The lie people tell when the truth is too big to swallow. "There's a room above this restaurant," he said. "It's clean, 2 beds. Private entrance around back, it was my daughter's." Everything in the room went still. Zara stared at him. He'd said was the way people say it when they mean was permanently. Not was as in she moved out, was as in she's gone. "I don't know you." "No. I don't take my nieces to strange men's rooms." "I'd be concerned if you did." No offense in his voice, no defense either. Just a flat acknowledgement that her caution was correct. "The entrance is separate. It locks from inside. I don't have a key." "Why?" "Why what?" "Why would you do that? You don't know us." Sojin looked at Bree. The 5-year-old had shifted in her sleep. The rabbit had fallen to the floor, and her hand was still open where it had been, reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. He looked at that small hand for a long time. Because somebody should have offered me a room when it happened to me. Zara felt something crack behind her sternum. Not trust, not yet, but the first splinter. The first hairline fracture in the wall she'd been building since the day the doctor said, aggressive, and stage 4 in the same sentence about her sister. Nyla pulled back from Zara's chest. Her face was swollen. Her braids with their white beads were coming loose. She looked at the man with the burned hand. Is your daughter going to come back? The room held its breath. Sojin's jaw tightened. The scar tissue on his hand seemed to pulse. He looked at the 9-year-old who had just asked the question that 17 of his own men had never dared to. No, he said. She's not. Nyla processed this. 9 years old. Processing permanent loss across a restaurant table with a stranger who understood it in a language that needed no translation. Then she won't mind if we sleep there, Nyla said. That sentence rewired the room. Zara looked at her niece. Sojin looked at the girl. The woman behind the counter turned away to wipe her eyes. Even one of the men in the corner booth set his phone down. Sojin stood. He picked up Bree's rabbit from the floor, dusted off the ear, and placed it on the table. I'll show you the room. They went up the back stairs, Sojin first, Zara carrying Bree. Nyla behind them, one hand on the railing, one hand holding the rabbit. The stairwell was narrow and smelled like cedar. At the top, a door with a deadbolt. Sojin opened it and stepped aside. The room was small but clean. 2 twin beds with white quilts. A window that looked out over the alley. A nightstand with a lamp that had a yellow shade. And on the wall beside the window, in pencil, a series of marks. Height marks, each one dated. The last one said, Yuna, 4 years. Sojin saw Zara see them. He didn't explain. He didn't cover them, he just stood in the doorway with his hands at his sides, and let the marks speak for themselves. Yuna, 4 years old. That's where the measuring stopped. Zara laid Bree on one of the beds. The girl didn't wake. Her chest rose and fell, and her hand opened and closed around nothing. Nyla climbed onto the other bed and pulled the quilt to her chin and stared at the ceiling. Zara turned to Sojin. He was already backing out of the doorway. Lock it behind me, he said. Breakfast is at 7. Come down or don't. Nobody will bother you. He closed the door. Zara locked it. She tested it. She tested it again. Then she stood in the center of the room that belonged to a dead girl named Yuna and pressed both hands against her face and cried without making a sound. Morning came too bright through the yellow-shaded lamp Zara had forgotten to turn off. She'd slept sitting up against the wall between the 2 beds. Her neck screamed when she moved. Her scrubs were wrinkled and smelled like yesterday. Bree was still asleep, starfished across the mattress with the rabbit pinned beneath her elbow. Nyla was already awake, sitting up, watching the door. Nobody came, Nyla said, like a report, like she'd been standing guard all night. Did you sleep? Some. Zara looked at her. 9 years old and running surveillance on a deadbolt. She wanted to tell her to stop, to be a kid, to let someone else carry the weight. But Zara understood. She'd been Nyla once. Different details, same architecture. The oldest daughter, the one who keeps watch, the one who forgets she's allowed to be scared. She checked her phone. 14 missed calls. 3 from her supervisor at Mercy Lane, 2 from the landlord's office. 6 from a number she didn't recognize but suspected was child services, and 3 from her cousin Reese, who had stood at the funeral like a statue and disappeared before the last prayer. She ignored all of them. Get your sister up, Zara said. We'll go downstairs. The restaurant looked different in morning light, softer. The dark red booths were almost warm. Sunlight pushed through the front windows and landed in squares on the tile floor. The smell was different too. Not sesame and garlic. Coffee. Toast. Something sweet with cinnamon. The woman behind the counter was the same one from yesterday, but she moved differently this morning. Slower. Deliberate. She looked at Zara and the girls, and her face did something complicated. Not pity. Not suspicion. Something closer to careful gentleness, like she was handling something she knew could break. "Sit anywhere," the woman said. Her accent was thick. Korean. She was maybe 60, with short silver hair and a face that looked like it had been kind once and decided to be practical instead. "I made American breakfast. Pancakes, eggs. The little one liked the juice yesterday, yes?" Bree nodded from behind Zara's leg. "I'll bring extra." They sat in the same booth. The dark red leather was cool against Zara's arms. Nyla sat up straight. Bree climbed in and immediately looked for the window where she could watch people walk by outside. The food came fast. Stacked pancakes, scrambled eggs, turkey bacon, orange juice, a small bowl of cut fruit. And beside it, without explanation, a plate of Korean rice porridge with a soft-boiled egg nestled on top. Nyla looked at the porridge. "What's that?" "Juke," the woman said. "Good for when your stomach is upset. Good for when your heart is upset, too." Nyla picked up a spoon and tried it. Her eyes widened slightly. She kept eating. Sojin appeared from somewhere in the back. He was wearing a different suit today. Dark charcoal. Same precision, same silver at the temples, same scar on the left hand, which he carried at his side. Like something he'd stopped trying to hide long ago. He had a phone pressed to his ear, and he was speaking Korean. Fast. Low. The tone wasn't angry. It was the tone of a man giving instructions that he expected followed without repetition. He ended the call, looked at the booth, the two girls eating. Zara watching him with those wide-set eyes that missed nothing. "Sleep okay?" "Fine," Zara said. The word was a locked box. He nodded and sat at the counter, not at their table. The woman placed a cup of black coffee in front of him without being asked. He drank it without sugar, without milk, without expression. At 8:15, the front door of the restaurant opened and a woman walked in who changed the temperature of the room. She was mid-50s, white, pantsuit the color of concrete, hair pulled back so tight it stretched her forehead into a billboard. She carried a leather folder like a weapon, and her heels clicked on the tile with the rhythm of a countdown clock. Behind her, a younger man with a clipboard lingered by the door like he'd been told to stay close, but not too close. "Mr. Park?" The woman stopped 3 feet from the counter. Her voice was efficient, no warmth, no waste. "I'm Diane Prescott, Westside District, Department of Child and Family Services." The restaurant went quiet. The two men who'd been in the corner booth yesterday were back. Their phones went down. Sojin set his coffee cup on the saucer without a sound. He turned on his stool. "I know who you are." Diane's eyes scanned past him to the booth, to Zara, to the two girls. Her gaze landed on Bree's bare feet and stayed there one beat too long. "We received a call this morning regarding 2 minors seen entering this establishment yesterday afternoon. Unaccompanied. No guardian present at the time of entry. Their aunt is right there." Sojin didn't point, he tilted his head. Minimal movement, maximum direction. Diane turned to Zara. The leather folder opened. "Are you the legal guardian of these children?" Zara's hands went flat on the table. She knew this. She'd known this was coming. The funeral was this morning's wound. This was tomorrow's. the system moving in before the grave dirt dried. I'm their aunt, Zara Coleman. Their mother was my sister, Denise Coleman. She passed 2 days ago. I'm the only family they have. Do you have legal guardianship documentation? I'm working on it. Do you have stable housing for the children? Zara's jaw locked. The truth was, a studio apartment with a leaking faucet and a pull-out couch that smelled like the last tenant's cigarettes. The truth was, she made $14.60 an hour, turning elderly patients every 2 hours so they didn't develop bed sores. The truth was, she had $217 in her checking account and a car with a check engine light that had been on since November. I'm working on that too. Diane wrote something in the folder. The pen moved like a gavel, each stroke a judgment. Miss Coleman, I understand this is a difficult time. But my responsibility is the safety and welfare of these children. Without documentation, without verified housing, and without a formal custody arrangement, I'm obligated to initiate a temporary placement review. Nyla's head snapped up from her porridge. She understood those words. Maybe not all of them, but enough. Temporary placement. Foster care. Strangers. Another door. Another set of locks. No. Nyla's voice cut through the restaurant like a blade. No. We're staying with Auntie Zara. Diane looked at the 9-year-old with professional sympathy, the kind that had been practiced in mirrors and training workshops. Sweetheart, No one is trying to separate you from your family. We just need to make sure you're not taking us anywhere. Nyla was standing now. Her hands were fists. The white beads in her braids trembled. Mama told us if anything happened, we go to Auntie Zara. Mama told us. Bree started crying. Not loud, the quiet kind. The kind where the child doesn't even know why the tears are coming, just that the air in the room changed, and everything feels wrong. Zara pulled Bree into her lap. She looked at Diane Prescott with an expression that was calm on the surface and volcanic 3 inches beneath. Give me 72 hours. Miss Coleman, 72 hours. I'll have a custody petition filed. I'll have housing verified. I'll have everything you need in your folder. But you are not taking these girls out of here today. Diane studied her. The younger man with the clipboard shifted by the door. The restaurant held its breath. Then Sojin spoke. He hadn't moved from his stool. His coffee was still in his hand. His voice came out low and level, and it filled the room the way smoke fills a hallway. Quiet. Everywhere. The children are housed in a registered residential unit above this restaurant. It's clean, furnished, and secure. I have the building permit and occupancy documentation available for your review. Their aunt is present and has been since yesterday evening. They've been fed, sheltered, and supervised. Everything you need for your file can be provided within the hour. Diane turned to him. Her expression flickered. She recognized something. Maybe the name. Maybe the suit. Maybe the way the 2 men in the corner booth had straightened when she'd walked in. Not with alarm, but with readiness. And your relationship to the children, Mr. Park? I'm a concerned community member who provided a meal and temporary shelter to 2 minors in distress. My involvement is documented and transparent. If you'd like to see the residential unit, I'll have my property manager walk you through it. He pulled his phone from his jacket. 1 text, sent without looking down. Diane's pen hovered over the folder. The room balanced on a wire. 72 hours, Diane said finally. She looked at Zara. I'll need a home address, a custody petition in progress, and proof of income. If those aren't on my desk by Thursday morning, I'll be back with a court order. She closed the folder, clicked toward the door. The younger man held it open, and she walked through without looking back. The door closed. The restaurant exhaled. Zara's hands were shaking under the table. Nyla sat back down. Bree's crying had faded to hiccups against Zara's chest. The woman behind the counter quietly refilled everyone's juice. Sojin set his coffee down. "You have 72 hours, he said. Not repeating Diane, translating it, turning a threat into a task. What do you need? Zara looked at him. This man she didn't know. This man with the burned hand and the dead daughter's room, and the restaurant that was clearly a front for something she hadn't yet decided she wanted to understand. This man who had just lied to a government official with the calm of someone ordering lunch. Why are you helping us? He stood, buttoned his jacket with one hand. The scar rippled with the motion. Because 72 hours isn't enough time to prove you deserve your own family. And nobody should have to. He walked toward the back of the restaurant, stopped, turned. My property manager's name is Mrs. Kang. She'll have the paperwork for the room within the hour. Tell the court whatever you need to tell them. He paused. And get the girls some shoes. He disappeared through the kitchen door. It swung shut behind him. Nyla looked at Zara. Auntie Zara, is he a good person? Zara stared at the kitchen door. The question sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow. I don't know yet, baby. But today, he's the only person who showed up. Mrs. Kang arrived at 9 sharp with a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. She was 63, built like a fire hydrant, and moved through the restaurant like she owned it. Which, technically, on paper, she did. 3 of Surgeon's properties were registered in her name. She didn't ask questions about why. She'd stopped asking questions about anything related to Park Seo-jin approximately 11 years ago. Around the same time, her mortgage disappeared overnight. She sat across from Zara in the back booth and opened the folder. Residential lease agreement, month to month, Unit 2B, above this establishment. Rent is $1 per month. She said it without blinking. Building inspection passed 4 months ago. Fire safety compliant. 2 egress points. The unit is zoned residential. I have the certificate here. Zara stared at the paperwork. $1. That's not real rent. It's legal rent. That's what matters for your filing. Mrs. Kang slid a pen across the table. Sign here, here, and initial here. I'll have copies for the court by noon. I can pay actual rent. I have a job. You have 72 hours, Ms. Coleman. You can argue about rent on day 4. Mrs. Kang tapped the signature line with one thick finger. Sign. Zara signed. Her hand was steady, but her throat wasn't. She could feel the machinery of someone else's world wrapping around her. Gears she hadn't asked to be placed inside. A structure that was holding her up and closing around her at the same time. Nyla was sitting on the floor near the front window, reading to Bree. From a children's book that the counterwoman had produced from somewhere. The book was in Korean, but Nyla was making up the story based on the pictures. In her version, the rabbit on the cover was a detective solving a case about missing pancakes. Bree was riveted. At 10:15, the front door opened again. This time, it wasn't a government worker in a pantsuit. It was worse. The woman who walked in was 70 years old and dressed like she was attending a board meeting at a bank that hadn't been built yet. Cream blazer, pearl earrings, hair set in a silver wave that didn't move when she moved. Her posture was a statement. Her mouth was a locked verdict. She carried a black handbag with a gold clasp, and she set it on the counter the way a judge sets down a gavel. She spoke Korean, sharp, fast. The counter woman froze mid-wipe. Seo-jin came out of the back. His face changed when he saw her. Not softened, tightened. The muscles along his jaw clenched like someone had pulled a wire. He answered her in Korean. His voice dropped a full register. The tone wasn't respectful. It was careful. The way a man speaks to someone who holds a different kind of power than he does. Not muscle, not territory. Blood. This was his mother, Park Myung-hee, and she had not come to visit. Zara didn't speak Korean. She didn't need to. She understood the body language perfectly. The way Myung-hee's eyes moved from her son to the booth to the two black girls sitting on the floor with a Korean picture book. The way her nostrils flared. The way her hand tightened on the gold clasp of her bag. The way she looked at Bree's bare feet and Nyla's loose braids. And Zara's wrinkled scrubs, and dismissed all three of them in a single breath. Myung-hee switched to English, deliberately, so they could hear. You put strangers in Yuna's room? The restaurant went cold. Sojin's hand curled at his side, the burn scar whitened under the pressure. They needed a place to stay. There are shelters. They're children. They're not your children. Myung-hee turned and looked directly at Zara. Her English was precise, accented but clear. Every word sharpened to a point. My son has a generous heart, it has always been his weakness. But this is a family establishment, and these accommodations were not intended for. She paused. The pause was louder than anything she could have said. For outside guests. Outside guests. Zara heard what she meant. The words underneath the words. She'd been hearing that frequency her entire life. In school offices. In hospital lobbies. In apartment buildings, where landlords looked at her ID and suddenly the unit was no longer available. Zara stood up. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She placed both hands flat on the table and rose like something being lifted from deep water. Ma'am, I appreciate your son's help. I didn't ask for it, he offered. If the room is a problem, we'll leave. But you should know, my sister just died. Her children have nowhere to go, and the only person in this entire city who stopped to help them was your son. Whatever issue you have with that, take it up with him, not with me, and not in front of these girls. Silence. Nyla had stopped reading. She was watching the old woman the way a deer watches a car coming down a dark road. Bree pressed closer to her sister. Myung-hee stared at Zara. Something passed across her face. Not shame. Not yet. But the faint recognition that she'd been met on equal ground by someone she'd expected to fold. She turned to Sojin and said something in Korean. Short. Final. Like a door slamming. Sojin answered with one word. Zara didn't know the word, but she knew the tone. It meant no. Myung-hee picked up her bag. She walked to the door, stopped, looked back at her son. Your father would be ashamed. My father would have done the same thing. The door closed behind her. The gold clasp of her bag caught the sunlight for one instant. Then she was gone. The counter woman let out a breath she'd been holding since Myung-hee walked in. The two men in the corner booth hadn't moved. One of them was texting rapidly under the table. Sojin turned to Zara. His face was controlled, but his eyes had something in them that she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not sadness. Exhaustion. The kind that comes from fighting the same war on two fronts for so long that your arms forget what rest feels like. I'm sorry, he said. Don't apologize for someone else's words. She's from a different generation. No. Zara's voice was steady. No heat, no venom, just bedrock. She's from a different choice. There are plenty of people her age who would never say that. She chose those words. That's on her. Sojin looked at her. Looked at her the way someone looks at a wall they've been leaning against when they realize it's actually a door. You're right. I know. The corner of his mouth moved, that same almost smile from the day before. Closer this time, like a lock being tested. Nyla stood up from the floor. She walked to Sojin and handed him the Korean picture book. Your mama's mean, she said. But this book is good. Can I keep reading it? Sojin looked down at the 9-year-old holding out a book with both hands and absolutely no fear in her eyes. And something behind his ribs that had been welded shut for 3 years made a sound like cracking ice. Keep it. The next 30 hours were a controlled demolition of Zara's pride. She filed the emergency custody petition at the family court downtown. The clerk behind the window looked at her scrubs, her ID, her sister's death certificate, and told her to have a seat. She sat for 4 hours. 4 hours in a plastic chair with her phone battery dying and her legs bouncing. And her mind running calculations she already knew the answers to. Income, $14.60 an hour, part-time. 28 hours a week because Mercy Lane wouldn't approve full-time without a nursing degree she couldn't afford to finish. Savings, $217.43. Housing, $1 a month room above a Korean restaurant that a Mafia boss's property manager had conjured out of thin air. She could see how it looked on paper. She could see how Diane Prescott would read it. How the judge would read it. How anyone would read it. It looked like charity. It looked like instability. It looked like a woman stitching together a life from borrowed thread. The clerk called her back at 3:40. Handed her a case number and a court date, 2 weeks out. 2 weeks. Diane's deadline was tomorrow morning. Zara walked out of the courthouse with the case number written on the back of a gas station receipt, because her phone had died and she didn't have a pen. She sat in her car with the check engine light glowing and let her forehead rest against the steering wheel. Her phone had enough charge for 1 call after she plugged it into the car charger. She called her cousin Reese. It rang 6 times. Yeah? I need help, Reese. With what? The girls. The custody paperwork. Denise. Zara, I told you at the funeral. I can't get involved. I got my own situation. They're about to take them. CPS came to the restaurant. They gave me 72 hours. Silence on the line. Then Reese exhaled. What restaurant? It doesn't matter. I need you to sign as a character reference. That's it. 1 page, 1 signature. Whose restaurant, Zara? A man who helped the girls when nobody else did. What kind of man? She closed her eyes. Does it matter? It matters if you're getting my name involved in something. I heard about the place on the east side. Korean spot. Everybody knows what that is, Zara. What everybody knows and what actually happened are 2 different things. I can't put my name on that. Reese. I'm sorry about Denise. I am. But those girls aren't my responsibility. The line went dead. Zara sat in the car. The check engine light pulsed. Traffic moved around her. The gas station receipt with the case number was getting damp in her palm. She smoothed it on her thigh and folded it into her wallet. She drove back to the restaurant. Parked in the alley, went up the back stairs. Nyla and Bree were on the beds. Mrs. Kang had brought clothes. Not new, clean though, folded. 2 small pairs of sneakers that were close enough to the right size. Nyla was wearing a yellow t-shirt that said Jeju Island on it, and she didn't ask what Jeju Island was. Bree was drawing on the back of printer paper with crayons someone had found. She was drawing a house. A big one. With a door that had no lock on it. Zara sat on the edge of the bed. She pulled out the receipt. I got the case number. Courts in 2 weeks. Is that fast? Nyla asked. It's what we've got. At 6 o'clock, there was a knock on the door downstairs. Not the back door, the front. 3 sharp raps. Zara went down. Through the restaurant, which was closed for the evening, past the counter woman who was wrapping leftovers in foil, past the 2 corner booth men who had been replaced by 2 different men who looked exactly the same. Phones, watchful eyes, readiness. She opened the front door. A man stood on the sidewalk. White, mid-40s, windbreaker over a polo shirt. He looked like a golf instructor who'd taken a wrong turn. He smiled too wide. His teeth were very straight. "Miss Coleman?" "Who's asking?" "My name is Dale Harrigan. I work with a private family services foundation. We heard about your situation through a mutual contact, and I wanted to offer some assistance." Zara's instincts fired. Mutual contact. She hadn't told anyone about her situation except Reese, Mrs. Kang, and the courthouse clerk. "What kind of assistance?" Dale reached into his windbreaker and pulled out an envelope. White, unsealed. He held it out. "We provide emergency relocation support for families in transition. Inside, you'll find a cashier's check for $15,000, a list of pre-approved apartments in 3 safe neighborhoods, and a contact number for a family law attorney who can expedite your custody petition." $15,000. Zara looked at the envelope, then at Dale, then at the envelope again. "What's the catch?" "No catch. We just ask that the family relocate to one of the listed neighborhoods. Clean start, stable environment, better schools for the girls." "Relocate from where?" Dale's smile held, but his eyes shifted. "Just a fraction. Just enough. From your current arrangement." And there it was, the real sentence underneath the friendly ones. "Move away from the restaurant. Move away from Sojin. Take the money and disappear." Zara's hand didn't reach for the envelope. Her hand stayed at her side. "Who sent you?" "The foundation operates independently. Who sent you?" Dale's smile cracked at the edges. He lowered the envelope slightly. "Ms. Coleman, this is a generous offer. Most people in your situation wouldn't hesitate." Zara stepped forward. Not much, 1 step. But Dale stepped back. She was 5'5" in scrubs, with bags under her eyes and a dead sister, and 2 girls asleep upstairs, and $200 to her name, and she made this man in his pressed windbreaker step back. "I asked you a question. If you can't answer it, you can leave." Dale tucked the envelope back into his jacket. The smile was gone. What replaced it was flat, evaluative, a different person looking out through the same face. "Think about it. The offer stands for 48 hours. He walked to a black sedan parked across the street, got in. The car pulled away without its headlights on. Zara stood in the doorway. The evening air was warm, but her hands were cold. She watched the sedan disappear around the corner. Then she closed the door and locked it. The counter woman was watching from the kitchen. "Who was that?" she asked. "Trouble." Zara went back upstairs. She locked the deadbolt, tested it, sat down between the 2 beds. Nyla was asleep this time. Bree was still drawing. The house on the paper now had flowers in front of it. "Auntie Zara, can I have a dog?" "We'll see, baby." Zara stared at the wall, at the pencil marks. Yuna, 4 years. She thought about $15,000 and how many problems it could solve. She thought about the man's eyes when the smile dropped. She thought about the one thing her mama used to say, before her mama died too, back when Zara was 13 and learning that the world would always try to buy what it couldn't break. If somebody's paying you to leave, it means you're standing in the right place. She didn't sleep. The man who had been texting under the table in the corner booth was named Kwon Tae-hyun. He had been with Sojin's organization for 9 years. He managed the East Side gambling operation. 3 rooms above a laundromat on Holt Street. Clean money flowing through dirty machines. He was efficient, loyal, invisible in the way that made him valuable. He was also the person who'd called Myung-hee. That morning, while Zara was at the courthouse and the girls were upstairs drawing houses without locks, Taehyun sat in a parked car on Garrison Boulevard and made a phone call. She refused. The voice on the other end was quiet, patient. The kind of patience that comes from having already decided the outcome and simply waiting for the world to catch up. Expected. Increase the pressure. Not the money, the pressure. How far? Enough to make the aunt feel unsafe, not enough to make Sojin suspicious. Taehyun ended the call. He looked at the restaurant in his rearview mirror. The close sign was still up. The upstairs window had a yellow glow from the lamp with the shade. He could see the silhouette of one of the girls. Small, moving. Probably the little one. He thought about his own daughter. 7 years old. Lived with his ex-wife in Virginia. He sent money every month. More than the court required. He hadn't seen her since March. He started the car and pulled away. Inside the restaurant, the morning after Diane's deadline, everything balanced on a phone call. Sojin made it from his office in the back. A small room with a desk, a safe, 3 monitors showing security feeds, and a framed photo turned face down that he hadn't looked at in 3 years, but couldn't bring himself to remove. The call was to Judge Anthony Morris, West Side Family Court. Not a bribe, not a threat. A conversation between 2 men who understood that the system had cracks, and sometimes people fell through them, and sometimes someone had to reach down. Tony. Sojin, it's been a while. I need a favor. The last favor cost me a golf membership. This one's simpler. There's a custody petition, case number 2024-F. C-8831. Emergency filing. The aunt is sole surviving family. 2 girls, 9 and 5, mother died this week. And your involvement? Provided temporary shelter, that's all. Silence on the line. Judge Morris had known Seo-jin for 14 years. They'd met at a charity auction for the Children's Hospital, the same hospital where Yuna had been treated. The same hospital where Morris's wife had been treated for lymphoma 2 years later. Seo-jin had covered the co-pays. Morris had never asked where the money came from. An understanding between men who lived in the gray space where law and necessity overlapped. I can move the hearing up. Maybe 5 business days instead of 2 weeks. But the petition has to be clean, Sojin. No shortcuts. If her financials don't hold, I can't help. They'll hold. Make sure they do. The call ended. Sojin set the phone down and looked at the security monitors. Feed 1, the front of the restaurant. Empty. Feed 2, the alley. A stray cat knocking over a recycling bin. Feed 3, the upstairs hallway outside the room where Zara and the girls were staying. The hallway was empty. But at 3:17 that morning, it hadn't been. He rewound the footage. At 3:17 a.m., a figure appeared at the bottom of the back stairs. Male, average build, dark clothing, no face visible. The figure stood at the base of the stairs for 47 seconds. Didn't climb, didn't retreat, just stood. Then turned and walked out the alley entrance. Sojin watched the footage 3 times, his jaw set tighter each time. He pulled up his phone, scrolled to a contact saved under a single letter. H. I need you at the restaurant. Bring Junho. Within an hour, 2 men arrived. Not the corner booth regulars. These were different, older, heavier. One of them had hands that looked like they'd been built for a purpose other than shaking. They sat at the counter, drinking coffee and saying nothing. Their eyes moved to the door every time it opened. Zara came downstairs at 8. She had dark circles that had graduated from bags to luggage. Her hair was pulled back tight. She wore the same scrubs. She carried a folder with every document she'd been able to gather: the case number, Mrs. King's lease, her last 3 pay stubs, the death certificate, Denise's will, which was one handwritten page that said, "Zara gets the girls," and was witnessed by a neighbor named Doris Whitfield. She stopped when she saw the 2 new men at the counter. Who are they? Sojin was at his usual stool. Coffee, black, no expression. Security. Security for what? For the building. There was no security yesterday. Yesterday, I didn't check the cameras. Zara's eyes narrowed. She looked at the 2 men. They looked back at her with the blank professionalism of people who had been told to protect something and didn't need to know why. What was on the cameras? Nothing confirmed. Someone in the alley. Probably nothing. Probably. Sojin looked at her, held her gaze. I don't do probably. That's why they're here. Zara processed this. The calculation behind her eyes was visible. She was weighing the danger of what she didn't know against the danger of what she did.
2 girls upstairs. CPS circling. A man on the sidewalk with $15,000 and a smile that dropped like a mask. And now someone in the alley at 3 in the morning. Was it the man from last night? Soo-jin's coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down. What man? Zara told him about Dale Harrigan, the envelope, the $15,000. The pre-approved apartments, the 48-hour window. The headlights that stayed off. She told him about refusing the money. Soo-jin listened without moving. His face didn't change, but something behind it did. A gear engaging. A mechanism clicking into place.
The transformation was invisible, but the counterwoman saw it because she'd been watching him for 11 years, and she knew the difference between Sojin at rest and Sojin at war. Describe him. Zara did. White, mid-40s, windbreaker, polo, teeth too straight, smile that unzipped. The car? Black sedan, no plates I could see. Headlights off. Sojin pulled out his phone. He typed a message, not a text. Something on an app Zara didn't recognize. The screen was dark with white text. You should have told me last night. I don't report to you. No, but someone offered you money to leave my building. That's not charity, that's strategy. He put the phone away. Someone wants you away from here. The question is whether they want you away from the girls or away from me. Zara hadn't considered the second option. It landed in her chest like a stone. Why would anyone care if I'm near you? Sojin didn't answer. He drank his coffee. The burn scar on his hand caught the light from the overhead fixture. Mrs. Kang burst through the front door at 8:45 with a garment bag over her arm. Court-appropriate clothing. For the hearing. She hung it on the booth hook and unzipped it. Inside was a dark blue dress. Professional. Simple. The right length. The right message. I guessed your size. If it's wrong, I have 2 more in the car. Zara looked at the dress. Then at Mrs. Kang. Then at Sojin, who was still drinking coffee and not looking at either of them. I have my own clothes. You have scrubs and a funeral dress. Neither one tells a judge you're stable. Mrs. Kang wasn't unkind. She was factual. Wear the dress, win the hearing. Argue about pride later. Zara took the dress. Nyla appeared at the top of the stairs. She dressed herself and Bree. Bree was wearing the Jeju Island shirt backward. Nyla had rebraided her own hair, the white beads clicking with each step. She stopped on the bottom stair and surveyed the restaurant. New men at the counter, Mrs. Kang with garment bags, Sojin drinking coffee like a man sitting in the eye of a hurricane. Something's wrong, Nyla said. Not a question. Every adult in the room looked at the 9-year-old. Nothing's wrong, Zara said. You're lying. You press your lips together when you lie. Mama did it too. Zara felt the words land like a slap she deserved. She crouched down. Some grown-up stuff is happening. I'm handling it. Your job is to eat breakfast and take care of your sister. Can you do that? Nyla studied her aunt with those old eyes. Eyes that had seen their mother's body covered with a sheet. Eyes that had walked 12 blocks without crying. Eyes that were 9 years old and already keeping count of every adult who had failed to show up. I can do that, Nyla said. But don't lie to me again. Zara nodded. Deal. Bree came down behind her sister. She walked straight to Sojin's stool, stood on her toes, and held up a piece of paper. I drew you a house. Sojin took the paper. The house had no lock on the door. It had flowers. It had a yellow sun with a face. And standing next to the house were 5 stick figures. 2 small, 1 medium, 1 tall with black hair, and 1 taller with silver hair and a line on her hand. The scar. She'd drawn the scar. Sojin looked at that drawing for a long time, longer than a man like him should look at a child's crayon picture. His thumb traced the edge of the paper. The counterwoman turned away. Thank you, he said. His voice was rough. You can put it on your fridge, Bree said. He folded the paper carefully, precisely, the way he did everything. And he put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest, where it would stay for the rest of this story and long after it ended. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. 5 days after the funeral. 5 days since 2 girls walked 12 blocks in funeral dresses. 5 days since a man with a burned hand held a door open and said, "Come eat." Zara wore the blue dress. It fit. She hated that it fit. She hated that Mrs. Kong had guessed her size down to the inch. She hated that the fabric was nicer than anything she'd ever owned, and that the woman who'd given it to her worked for a man whose business she still hadn't fully named in her own mind. She buttoned it up. She looked in the small mirror above the nightstand in Yuna's room and saw a version of herself that could pass for stable, that could pass for ready, that could sit in a courtroom and say, I can take care of these girls, with a straight face, while her checking account screamed otherwise. Nyla dressed Bree. The new sneakers Mrs. Kang had brought were half a size too big, but Nyla stuffed tissue paper in the toes and didn't tell anyone. She rebraided her own hair. The white beads clicked when she moved her head. She chose the cleanest shirt in the small pile of donated clothes and ironed it with the flat of her hand against the mattress. Do I have to talk to the judge? Nyla asked. Maybe. If he asks you something, just tell the truth. The whole truth? Zara looked at her niece. 9 years old, already learning that truth comes in sizes, and not all of them fit through every door. Tell him what you feel, baby. That's enough. Mrs. Kang drove them, a gray sedan that smelled like leather cleaner and sesame crackers. Bree sat in the back with the rabbit on her lap. Nyla sat in the middle, spine straight, hands folded, looking out the window like she was memorizing the route in case she needed to walk it later. The courthouse was old, brownstone, metal detectors at the entrance, a security guard who looked at Bree's rabbit and said, "Does your friend have any weapons?" And Bree said, "She has teeth, but she only bites bad people." And the guard laughed for the first time that morning. Courtroom 4B, second floor. The hallway smelled like floor wax and old coffee. Zara sat on a bench outside the door with the girls on either side of her. The folder in her lap contained everything: lease agreement, pay stubs, death certificate, Denise's handwritten will, a letter from Mercy Lane confirming her employment, a character reference from Mrs. Patterson, the 91-year-old woman whose bed she turned every 2 hours, who had dictated the letter to a nurse because her hand shook too much to write. Zara Coleman is the most dependable person I have ever met. If she says she'll take care of those girls, she will. I'm 91 years old. I know people. At 8:52, Diane Prescott arrived. Same pantsuit, same folder, same heels, clicking like a metronome, counting down to something. She nodded at Zara. Professional. Neither warm nor cold. She took a seat on the opposite bench. At 8:55, a man Zara didn't recognize walked up. Short, compact, wire-rimmed glasses. Briefcase that looked like it had survived a war. He stopped in front of her. Ms. Coleman? I'm Howard Yoon. I'll be representing you today. Zara blinked. I didn't hire a lawyer. No, you didn't. Howard sat down next to her without being invited. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a legal pad already covered in notes. Mrs. Kang retained me yesterday afternoon. My fees have been covered. I've reviewed your petition, your financials, the lease agreement, and the circumstances of your sister's passing. I have 3 motions prepared and a backup strategy if the judge asks about long-term housing stability. I didn't ask for a lawyer. No, you didn't. He said it the same way twice. Not dismissive, patient. But you need one. The state has one. You should too. Miss Coleman, I've been practicing family law for 23 years. I've handled over 400 custody cases. I'm good at this. Let me be good at this for you. Zara looked at him. His glasses were slightly crooked. His tie had a small stain near the bottom that he'd tried to hide with the briefcase strap. His shoes were scuffed. He didn't look like a man who worked for the kind of organization that Sojin ran. He looked like a man who had been doing this long enough to care, and not long enough to stop. Fine. Good. Don't speak unless the judge addresses you directly. When he does, be brief. Be honest. Don't volunteer information he hasn't asked for. If you feel emotional, that's fine. Judges are human. But don't let the emotion run the answer. Let the answer carry the emotion. I understand. One more thing. Howard looked at her over his glasses. The judge may ask about the man providing your housing. If he does, the answer is, he's a local business owner who offered emergency assistance through his property manager after learning about the children's situation. That's it. That's the whole answer. Because the whole answer is more complicated than that. The whole answer always is, Ms. Coleman. That's why people hire lawyers. The courtroom doors opened at 9 sharp. Judge Anthony Morris presided, mid-60s, black. Gray beard trimmed close. Reading glasses perched on his nose. He had the face of a man who had heard every lie the human heart could construct, and had long ago stopped being surprised, but never stopped paying attention. The hearing lasted 47 minutes. Diane Prescott presented her assessment. 2 minors, mother deceased, no father on record. Sole surviving family member, maternal aunt, Zara Coleman. Current housing, temporary arrangement above a commercial property. Income, below the threshold for a 2-dependent household. Diane recommended continued monitoring with a 60-day review period before permanent custody could be granted. Howard Yoon countered, point by point. The lease was legal, registered, inspected. The income was consistent, with documented history. The employer reference confirmed reliability. The handwritten will expressed the mother's clear and unambiguous intent. Mrs. Patterson's letter was read aloud. I'm 91 years old. I know people. The courtroom clerk smiled. Judge Morris listened. He read every document. He asked Zara 3 questions. Miss Coleman, what is your relationship to these children? They're my sister's daughters, my nieces. I've been in their lives since the day they were born. Why should this court grant you emergency custody? Because their mother trusted me. Because I'm the only person they have. And because I'd rather die than let them wake up in a stranger's house. The room held still. And the temporary housing arrangement. How long do you intend to remain at the current address? Howard started to speak. Judge Morris raised one finger without looking at him. Howard stopped. Zara answered, as long as it takes me to afford something permanent. I'm not proud about where I'm staying, Your Honor. I'm not proud about needing help. But I'm here. I showed up. And those 2 girls upstairs know that when they wake up, I'm going to be there. That's more than a lot of people can say. Judge Morris looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at the file. Then at Diane. 60 days is reasonable for a review period. Emergency temporary custody is granted to Zara Coleman effective immediately. Ms. Prescott, schedule a home visit at the 30-day mark. Mr. Yoon, ensure your client's housing and financial documentation remains current. He signed the order. The gavel came down once. Not hard, just final. Zara's hands were shaking under the table. Howard put a hand on her shoulder for 1 second, then removed it. Outside the courtroom, Nyla was sitting on the bench with Bree asleep against her side. The rabbit was on the floor again. Zara walked out, and Nyla stood up so fast the white beads in her hair clattered. What happened? Zara crouched down. She held Nyla's face in both hands. The 9-year-old's eyes searched hers, looking for bad news, looking for another door that wouldn't open, another lock that had been changed. You're staying with me. Nyla's face crumpled. Not the controlled mask, not the surveillance mode, not the girl who'd walked 12 blocks without crying. The child underneath. The one who'd been holding her breath since Tuesday. She fell into Zara's arms and sobbed. Loud. Messy. The kind of crying that echoes in courthouse hallways and makes strangers look away and then look back because they can't help it. Bree woke up, saw her sister crying, saw her aunt holding her, climbed off the bench and wrapped her arms around both of them. The rabbit stayed on the floor. For the first time in 5 days, she didn't reach for it. Howard stood 3 feet away with his briefcase and his crooked glasses and waited. When Nyla pulled back, she wiped her face with both palms and looked up at Zara. Can we tell Mr. Sojin? Zara's throat tightened. Not because of the question, because of what it meant. Because a 9-year-old who trusted almost no one had added someone to the list. Yeah, we can tell him. They got back to the restaurant at 10:40. Mrs. King dropped them off and drove away without ceremony. The front door was unlocked. The counter woman was making lunch prep. The corner booth was empty for once. Sojin was in his office. Door open. He was standing at the desk with his phone in his hand and his back to the door. He was looking at the security monitors. Feed 3. The upstairs hallway. When Nyla walked up behind him and said, "We get to stay," he turned around. His face was neutral, controlled. The same face he wore when negotiating shipping routes and handling problems that didn't have clean solutions. But Nyla ran at him and wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her face into his jacket, and he stood there. Frozen, his arms at his sides, his burned hand hovering over the back of her head, like a man reaching for something he's terrified to touch, because the last time he held something that small, it was taken away. Then his hand came down, gently, on the back of her braids, and he held it there. Bree joined in, grabbed his leg. The rabbit dangled from one hand. Sojin stood in his office with 2 children attached to him, and his jaw was locked and his eyes were fixed on a point above the doorway. And if you looked closely, if you really looked, the man who hadn't cried in 3 years was fighting a war behind his face that he was losing by the second. Zara stood in the doorway. She didn't move. She just watched. And then Sojin looked at her, over Nyla's head, through the controlled mask and the neutral expression and the careful distance he'd kept for 5 days. He looked at her and his eyes were wet. "Thank you," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. "For letting them come back." Zara felt the wall behind her sternum fracture, not fall, not yet. But fracture, a structural break that couldn't be unbroken. "They wanted to come back," she said. He nodded, once. His hand still on Nyla's braids, Bree still attached to his leg, the crayon drawing still in his jacket pocket against his chest. That afternoon, after the girls fell asleep in the upstairs room, Seojin found Zara sitting on the back stairs. The alley was quiet. A street light buzzed. She was holding her phone, staring at a text from Mercy Lane. Her supervisor, asking where she was. Asking if she was coming back, asking if they needed to fill her shifts permanently. He sat down next to her, not close. 1 step apart. Enough distance to breathe. Enough proximity to hear. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "More security cameras?" "No." He was quiet for a moment. His hands were folded. The scar was hidden between his palms. "The man who came to your door, Dale Harrigan. I had someone look into him. He doesn't work for any foundation. He works for a man named Victor Ree, my uncle." Zara turned her head. "Your uncle?" "My mother's brother. He's been trying to take control of this operation for the last 2 years, since Yuna." He paused. "Since I stopped being the person he needed me to be." "What does that have to do with me?" "Nothing. And everything." He looked at the alley wall. Victor saw an opportunity. A man weakened by grief, making emotional decisions. Letting strangers into spaces that used to belong to family. "He's testing how far I'll go, whether I'll protect you. Whether protecting you makes me vulnerable. So we're leverage." "He thinks so." "And are we?" Seojin looked at her, the street light caught the silver at his temples. The scar on his hand pulsed in the half-light. "You're not leverage. You're the first thing that's mattered to me in 3 years. That makes you something much more dangerous." The words landed between them like a stone in still water. Rings spreading outward, touching everything. Zara didn't respond, she looked at her phone. At the text from Mercy Lane. At the life she was losing while building one she hadn't planned. "I don't need you to protect me. I know. I need you to be honest with me. I'm trying. Try harder." She put her phone in her pocket. "Who else knows about your uncle?" "Mrs. Kang, the men at the counter. And someone inside my organization is feeding Victor information. I don't know who yet." "The man on the camera? At 3 a.m.? Maybe, maybe not. But someone told Victor about you the same day you arrived. Someone in this restaurant." Zara looked at the back stairs. At the door at the top that led to Yuna's room where her nieces were sleeping. She thought about the figure on the camera at 3:17 a.m. Standing at the bottom of those stairs. 47 seconds. Not climbing, not leaving. Measuring. "What do you need?" she asked. Sojin was quiet for a long time. The streetlight buzzed. The alley was empty. The sound of the girls sleeping carried through the cracked window above them like the smallest, most breakable thing in the world. I need help. 2 words. From a man who controlled shipping routes and gambling operations and half the commercial real estate east of the river. A man who had 17 men who would take a bullet for him. A man who hadn't smiled in 3 years and hadn't asked for anything in longer. I need help. Zara looked at him. He didn't look away. He sat on that step with his burned hand open on his knee and waited for her answer, the way he'd waited at the restaurant door 5 days ago. Patient. Still. Like a man who understood that the most important moments in a life are the ones where you stop moving and let someone else decide. Okay, she said. He exhaled. They sat on the stairs, 1 step apart. The alley hummed. Above them, 2 girls slept beneath white quilts in a dead girl's room. Below them, a city moved through its evening without knowing that something had just shifted. Something small, something load-bearing, something that would hold the weight of everything that came next. Victor ran his operation from a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of a building he didn't own, but controlled through 3 layers of shell companies. He was 67 years old, lean the way old predators are lean. His hair was still mostly black, which he maintained with the same discipline he applied to everything. His suits were Italian, his watch was Swiss, his patience was Korean. He sat behind his desk with a tablet showing the same security footage that Sojin had seen. The figure at the base of the stairs. The 47 seconds of standing still. She refused the money, Taehyun said. He stood across the desk with his hands behind his back. Victor didn't look up from the tablet. Describe the refusal. She asked who sent the offer. 3 times. She didn't reach for the envelope. Harrigan said she stepped forward and he stepped back. Victor's mouth moved, not a smile, an acknowledgement. The way a chess player nods when an opponent makes an unexpected move. She's not the weakness I expected. No, sir. She's stronger? Different. She doesn't calculate the way we do. She just decides. Victor set the tablet down. He looked at Taehyun for the first time. People who just decide are unpredictable. Unpredictable people near my nephew make me uncomfortable. He stood and walked to the window. The city stretched out below him like a circuit board. The custody hearing went well? Emergency temporary custody granted, 60-day review. Judge Morris? Yes. Victor nodded slowly. He pressed 1 finger against the glass like he was marking a point on a map. My sister called me. Told me about the girls, about the room. His voice shifted, something personal slipping through the professional armor. She's concerned. Mrs. Park has reason to be. My sister's concerns are emotional. Mine are structural. Victor turned from the window. Seojin was the most effective operator in this organization. Disciplined. Cold when necessary, strategic. Then Yuna died and he became something else. Something softer. Something that makes mistakes. He hasn't made mistakes. He's housing strangers in his dead daughter's room. He's using organizational resources for personal sentiment. He retained a lawyer for a woman he met 5 days ago. Victor sat back down. His chair didn't creak. Nothing about him creaked. Those are mistakes, Taehyun. They're just slow ones. The kind that don't look dangerous until the structure collapses. What would you like me to do? Continue reporting. I want to know who comes and goes. I want to know every conversation between Sojin and the aunt. I want to know when he's distracted and by what. Victor picked up the tablet again. Swiped to a different feed. This one showed the front of the restaurant in real time. The closed sign, the empty sidewalk. And find out everything about Zara Coleman. Employment history, family, debt. Medical records if possible. Everyone has a pressure point, hers just isn't money.
Taehyun nodded. He turned to leave. One more thing, Taehyun stopped. The older girl, the 9-year-old. She's observant. Very. Children who are observant become witnesses. I don't want witnesses. The sentence hung in the air. Taehyun's face didn't change, but his hand, behind his back, closed into a fist. Understood, he walked out. That same evening, Zara was in the restaurant kitchen for the first time. The counter woman, whose name was Haewon, had invited her in to help prep for the next day's lunch service. This was unusual. Haewon didn't invite people into her kitchen the way most people don't invite strangers into their operating room. But Haewon had been watching Zara for 5 days, watching her hold those girls together with nothing but stubbornness and sleep deprivation, watching her refuse money, watching her stand up to Myung-hee without raising her voice, watching her walk into a courtroom in a borrowed dress and walk out with custody. Haewon respected competence. She respected it more than wealth, more than power, more than the organization she'd been adjacent to for 11 years. You chop like a nurse, Haewon said, watching Zara cut scallions. What does that mean? Precise. No wasted movement, but too careful. This is food, not surgery. Faster. Zara sped up, the knife moved. Haewon nodded once, better. Still too careful, but better. They worked in silence for a while. The kitchen was small and clean and smelled like stock that had been simmering since dawn. The radio played Korean music at low volume. Bree's drawing was taped to the refrigerator door.
Sojin hadn't put it there.
Haewon had found it in his jacket pocket when she'd hung up his coat and moved it to where she felt it belonged. How long have you worked here? Zara asked. 11 years. Since before Yuna. The name settled into the kitchen like a third person taking a seat. Can I ask what happened? Haewon's knife stopped. She set it down. Wiped her hands on her apron. Took a breath. Electrical fire. In their house. 3 in the morning. Sojin was here. At the restaurant. Working. Like always. By the time he got there, the fire trucks were already leaving. His wife was outside in her bathrobe. Alive. Yuna was not. Zara's hands stilled on the cutting board. His wife survived? His wife was outside before the fire reached the second floor. Yuna's bedroom was on the second floor. Haewon picked her knife back up. His wife left 3 months later. Took her share of what she was owed and moved to California. She didn't fight for anything except money. She left him after their daughter died? She left him because looking at him reminded her of what they lost. Some people stay and grieve together. Some people leave because grief makes them selfish. Haewon sliced a radish in half with one clean motion. He doesn't talk about her. Not the wife. Yuna, sometimes, late at night, when he thinks no one is listening. He sits in the room upstairs. The room where you're staying. He sits on the bed and says her name. Zara put the knife down. We're in his daughter's room. You're in the room he kept for her. Clean sheets, fresh air, the height marks on the wall.
He maintained it like she was coming back. For 3 years. Haewon looked at Zara with eyes that held 11 years of watching a man she cared about disassemble piece by piece. Then you came. And those girls filled the beds and the sheets got wrinkled and the room had noise again. Do you understand what that means to him? Zara understood. She understood in the place behind her sternum where the fracture had been spreading since she watched him hold Nyla's braids, in the office doorway. He can't make us responsible for his healing. No, he can't. And you can't make him responsible for your survival. Haewon pointed the knife at Zara gently, the way a teacher uses a pointer.
But perhaps you can stop pretending that neither thing is happening. The back door of the kitchen opened. Nyla stood there.
She was supposed to be upstairs asleep. She was wearing the Jeju Island shirt, which she'd turned the right way around, and her braids were loose. The white beads were in her hand. "Auntie Zara, there's someone outside." The temperature in the kitchen dropped. Zara moved fast. Through the kitchen, through the restaurant. Past the corner booth where one of the security men was already standing, his phone pressed to his ear. She got to the back stairs. Looked out the alley door. A car was parked at the mouth of the alley. Engine running, headlights off. Black sedan, same one. "Go upstairs," Zara said to Nyla. "Lock the door, don't open it for anyone except me." "Auntie Zara." "Now baby, go now." Nyla went. Her bare feet slapped the stairs. The deadbolt clicked. Zara heard it, and something in her chest locked at the same time. The security man was beside her now. Big. Hands built for a purpose. He looked at the car. "Stay inside," he said. He stepped into the alley. The car didn't move. 30 seconds. A minute. The security man walked toward it, steady, not rushing, professional. At 15 feet, the car's reverse lights flared. It backed out of the alley. Slow. Deliberate. Like someone who wanted to be seen leaving. Who wanted the message to land before they disappeared. The car turned onto the main road. Gone. The security man came back inside. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Korean. Fast. Urgent. Within 6 minutes, Sojin was in the restaurant. He'd been at a meeting across town. His tie was loosened. His jacket was off. The burn scar was fully visible, running up his forearm further than Zara had seen before. It went past the wrist, past the elbow, halfway to the shoulder. He'd been reaching into that fire for a long time. "Where are the girls?" "Upstairs, locked in." "Did they see anything?" Nyla saw the car from the window. Sojin's jaw hardened. He turned to the security man and spoke Korean. 1 sentence. The man nodded and left through the front door. Within minutes, a second man arrived. Then a third. The restaurant that had been quiet 5 minutes ago now had the energy of a command center being activated. Sojin turned to Zara. "I'm moving you." "No, this isn't a negotiation." "You're right, it's not, because we're not leaving." Zara's voice was low, controlled. The same bedrock tone she'd used with Myung-hee, with Dale Harrigan. With every force that had tried to push her sideways since her sister died. Those girls just got stable. They just stopped flinching at every sound. They just started sleeping through the night. I'm not packing them up and running because someone parked a car in an alley. Someone parked that car because they wanted you to know they could. I know what it means. Do you? Because these are not people who stop at messages. And I am not a person who runs. She stepped closer, not aggressive, direct. You said you needed help. This is what help looks like. I stay, the girls stay, and we figure out who's sending the cars. Sojin looked at her. 5'5", wrinkled scrubs she'd changed back into after the hearing. Hair coming loose from the bun, bags under her eyes. $217 in her checking account. And she was standing in front of him, telling a man who controlled half the East Side that she wasn't moving. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met. You clearly haven't met enough black women. The corner of his mouth, that almost smile. Closer than it had ever been. I'm doubling security. 2 men on the alley entrance, 1 at the back stairs. Nobody comes in or out without clearance. Fine. And I'm putting cameras on the street, both directions. Fine. And you're going to let me teach you how to use the security system. The monitors, the panic button under the counter, the emergency exit through the kitchen cold storage. There's a panic button under the counter? Haewon keeps it next to the kimchi. Zara almost laughed. Almost. The sound got halfway up her throat and stopped, because laughing felt like a luxury she hadn't earned yet. Fine, Sojin nodded. He started to turn toward the back office, then stopped. The drawing Bree made, the one with the house. What about it? She drew 5 people. I know. She drew me in it. Zara was quiet. Nobody's drawn me in anything since Yuna. He walked into the back office and closed the door. Zara stood in the restaurant. The security men moved around her. The monitors glowed. The alley was empty and watched. Upstairs, a deadbolt held. 2 girls slept behind it, and somewhere in the city, a black sedan circled. But in this building, in this moment, the walls held. It was Nyla who figured it out. Not because she was looking, because she never stopped looking. Because a 9-year-old who had watched her mother die and walked 12 blocks barefoot and learned to sleep with one ear on a deadbolt had developed the kind of radar that most adults never build. She noticed things. The wrong shoe in a doorway. The way someone held their phone. The angle of a glance that lasted 1 beat too long. She noticed Taehyun. It was Thursday morning, 8 days since the funeral. Zara was downstairs with Howard Yoon, reviewing paperwork for the 30-day home visit. Bree was in the kitchen with Haewon, standing on a step stool, stirring something in a pot with a wooden spoon that was taller than her arm. She was singing a song she'd made up about a rabbit who cooked soup for sad people. Haewon listened without correcting her technique, which was the highest compliment the woman had ever paid anyone under 60. Nyla was in the booth, reading. She'd moved past the Korean picture books. Mrs. Kang had brought her a stack of chapter books from a second-hand store. Nyla was halfway through one about a girl detective who solved mysteries on a farm. She liked it because the girl didn't wait for adults to fix things. Taehyun came in through the front door at 8:22. He ordered coffee, sat at the counter, pulled out his phone. Normal. Routine. He'd been doing this every morning since Zara arrived. Same seat, same order, same phone. But this morning, Nyla was watching from a different angle. The booth she'd chosen was offset from her usual spot. She could see the counter from the side instead of straight on. And from this angle, she could see Taehyun's phone screen. She couldn't read the words. They were in Korean. But she could see the photos. Photos of the back stairs, of the alley entrance, of the upstairs hallway, of the window of the room where she and Bree slept. Close. Zoomed. The kind of photos someone takes when they're cataloging access points, not memories. Nyla's book lowered half an inch. Her eyes moved from the screen to Taehyun's face. He was scrolling, selecting, sending. His thumb moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times. She didn't say anything. She didn't move. She turned the page of her book like she was still reading. But her eyes stayed on the phone until Taehyun locked the screen and put it in his pocket. She waited. Taehyun finished his coffee, spoke briefly with one of the security men, laughed at something. The laugh was easy, practiced, and completely wrong. Nyla knew wrong laughs. Her mother's boyfriend before the last one had laughed like that. Easy on the surface, empty underneath. The kind of laugh that was really just a sound people made to fill space, while they were thinking about something else entirely. Taehyun left at 8:41. Nyla closed her book. She walked to the back office. The door was open. Sojin was at his desk. 3 monitors, phone, coffee. The morning architecture of a man who ran an empire from a room the size of a walk-in closet. She knocked on the doorframe. He looked up. Nyla. The man who sits at the counter every morning. The one with the black jacket. Sojin's eyes shifted. Subtle. The way a compass needle moves when something magnetic enters the room. Taehyun? He has pictures of our stairs on his phone. And the alley. And the window of our room. The office went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The difference between no sound and the absence of everything. You saw this. From the booth, I could see his screen. He was sending them to someone. Sojin's hands were flat on the desk, the burn scar pressed against the wood. His face didn't change. Nothing moved. But Nyla had spent her whole life reading rooms, and she could feel the temperature drop 10 degrees in the space between his eyes. How long was he looking at the photos? 3 minutes, maybe? He picked some and sent them. Then he locked his phone. Did he see you watching? No, I was reading my book. She held it up. The girl detective on the cover stared out with illustrated confidence. I pretended. Sojin looked at the 9-year-old standing in his doorway, with a second-hand mystery novel and intelligence that most of his trained men hadn't demonstrated in a decade. He looked at her the way you look at someone who just handed you the missing piece of a puzzle you didn't know was incomplete. Nyla, listen to me. What you just told me is important, very important. And I need you to do something hard. What? Don't tell anyone else. Not Bree, not your aunt, not Haewon, not yet. Can you do that? Nyla's chin lifted. I kept a secret when Mama was sick. She told me not to tell Bree how bad it was. I didn't tell her for 4 months. The weight of that sentence settled into the room like a stone dropped in deep water. 4 months, Sojin repeated. 4 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. I counted. He stood up, walked around the desk, crouched down in front of her, eye level. The way he'd done with her on the sidewalk the first day. But different now. Something had changed in the geography between them. He wasn't a stranger crouching to meet a scared child. He was something else. Something that didn't have a name yet, but had a shape. You're the bravest person I know. Braver than you? Much braver than me. I have men with guns. You have a library book. The corner of Nyla's mouth twitched. Not a full smile, a seed of one. The first Zara hadn't planted. Go back to your booth. Keep reading. If you see anything else, come tell me. Same way. Quiet. Nyla nodded. She turned to leave. Stopped. Mr. Sojin? Yes? Is he the one who parked the car? Sojin didn't answer, but his silence was an answer, and Nyla was old enough to read it. She went back to her booth. Within the hour, Sojin made 4 phone calls. None of them were in Korean. 2 were in English. 1 was in Mandarin. 1 was to a number that had no name attached to it in any phone book, on any server, in any record. By noon, he knew everything. Taehyun had been reporting to Victory for 7 months. Not since Zara arrived. Since before. Since the organization's shipping revenue had dropped 11% after Sojin pulled back from daily operations in the months following Yuna's death. Victor had identified the gap, had approached Taehyun through an intermediary, had offered him control of the East Side gambling rooms if he provided information and, when the time came, facilitated a transfer of authority.
Taehyun wasn't motivated by malice. He was motivated by the calculation that Sojin was declining and Victor was ascending, and the smart money was on the man who wasn't grieving. He had a daughter in Virginia. He sent money every month. He needed the income to keep flowing. Loyalty was a luxury he couldn't afford. Sojin understood this. Understanding didn't make it hurt less. He sat in his office with the monitors glowing and the photo of Yuna face down on the desk and the crayon drawing taped to the wall where Haiwan had moved it after finding it in his jacket. And he made a decision. Not a business decision. Not a strategic calculation. Something deeper. Something that came from the place where the fire had burned away everything. Except the thing that refused to stop reaching. He picked up the phone.
I want a meeting with Victor. Tonight. My location. The voice on the other end was surprised. You're sure? Tell him I'm ready to discuss terms. Tell him I'm tired. Are you? Tell him what he needs to hear. He hung up. He looked at the crayon drawing on the wall, 5 stick figures, a house with no lock. Flowers in the yard, a yellow sun with a face. Then he looked at the security monitors. Feed 3, the upstairs hallway. Empty. Safe, for now. That evening, So-jin did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He cooked. Not in the restaurant kitchen. In the small kitchen behind it, the private one. The one with the gas stove he'd installed when the building was renovated and the copper pots he'd brought from the house before he sold it. The house with the second-floor bedroom. The house with the electrical fire. He'd sold it 6 weeks after Yuna took nothing except the pots and the height mark measurements he'd traced onto a piece of paper before the new owners repainted the walls. He made doenjang jjigae, fermented soybean stew. The recipe was his father's, not written down, carried in muscle memory. The way his hands moved the knife. The way he measured the paste by smell, not spoon. The way he let it simmer at exactly the right point between boil and patience. Haewon watched from the doorway. She'd seen him cook 3 times in 11 years. Once for a visiting associate from Seoul. Once for Yuna's 4th birthday, the last birthday, and now. She said nothing. She turned and went to set the table. Not the restaurant tables, the small table in the back room, 6 chairs. She set 5 places. Zara came downstairs with the girls at 6:30. She stopped at the back room entrance. The table was set. The stew was in a clay pot in the center, still bubbling. There was rice. There were side dishes. Small plates of pickled radish and seasoned spinach and crispy dried seaweed that Bree had been eating by the handful for 3 days. So-jin stood at the head of the table. No jacket, sleeves rolled up. The full length of the burn scar visible for the first time. It ran from his knuckles to his mid-forearm. A map of the moment he tried to reach through fire to save what he loved most. And come out holding nothing. He'd never let anyone see the full scar. Not the men who worked for him. Not Mrs. Kang, not Haewon. You cooked, Zara said. My father's recipe. What's the occasion? He looked at her, then at Nyla. Then at Bree, who was already climbing into a chair and reaching for the seaweed. No occasion. I just wanted to make dinner. They ate. Bree ate 3 bowls of rice because the stew was too spicy, and the rice made the burning stop, and she thought that was hilarious. Nyla ate quietly, carefully, tasting everything once before committing. She liked the spinach. She went back for more. Haewon watched from the kitchen with her arms crossed and her face arranged in its most neutral expression, which meant she was deeply moved and refusing to show it. Zara tasted the stew. The flavor was deep and earthy and complex, and it warmed her from the inside out. She looked at So-jin over the pot. This is good. It's my father's. He taught you? He taught me this one dish. He said, a man who can cook one thing well will never be completely lost. So-jin broke apart a piece of dried seaweed between his fingers. He died when I was 23. Heart attack. No warning. I made this stew every night for a month after. My apartment smelled like doenjang for weeks. My neighbors complained. Did you stop? Eventually. When the grief changed from something I needed to feed to something I could carry. Zara understood that. The distinction between grief as a wound that demands and grief as a weight that travels. Her sister had been dead for 8 days. The wound was still demanding. "It'll change," he said, reading her. "Not less. Different." She nodded, set her spoon down, picked it up again, ate. Bree finished her rice and climbed down from her chair and walked to Sojin and held up her arms. The universal gesture. "Pick me up." He looked at the 5-year-old, then at Zara, then back at Bree. He picked her up. She settled against his chest like she'd been doing it her whole life. Her head found the space between his shoulder and his neck. Her eyes closed. The rabbit dangled from one hand. Sojin sat very still. His burned hand was on her back. His jaw was tight. His eyes found a point on the wall above everyone's head and stayed there. Nyla watched from across the table. She looked at Zara. "He's crying again," she whispered, "but quiet." Zara looked. She saw what Nyla saw. The wet line at the edge of his eye, that he wouldn't blink away, because blinking would mean acknowledging it. She reached across the table. Her hand landed next to his free hand. Not touching. Close enough that he could bridge the gap if he wanted. She left it there. His hand moved. 1 inch. His fingers touched hers. Just the tips. Just the edges. The burned scar tissue against her unbroken skin. They stayed like that. Bree sleeping against his chest. Nyla watching. Heywan in the kitchen doorway with her hand over her mouth. The stew cooling in its pot. The evening settling around them like a blanket that didn't quite fit, but covered what mattered. At 8:15, Sojin's phone buzzed. 1 message. 1 word. Confirmed. Victor was coming. Victor Ree arrived at 10 p.m. 2 cars. Black. The restaurant was closed. The front lights were off. The back room was lit. Sojin sat at the table where he'd made dinner 4 hours earlier. The stew pot was gone. The side dishes were gone. In their place was a single glass of water and nothing else. The girls were upstairs. Zara was with them. Sojin had told her what was happening. Not all of it. Enough. "My uncle is coming. Stay upstairs. Lock the door." "What's he coming for?" "A conversation." "At 10 at night?" "Some conversations don't happen in daylight." She'd searched his face, searched it the way she searched everything, thoroughly. Without flinching. "Are you safe?" "In my own restaurant, always." "That's not what I asked." He'd looked at her, really looked. Not the controlled assessment of a man who ran an organization. The open, unguarded look of a man who was standing on the edge of something and couldn't tell if it was a cliff or a bridge. "I'm safe," he said. "And after tonight, you will be too." She'd gone upstairs, locked the deadbolt, sat between the 2 beds. Nyla was awake. Bree was asleep. The rabbit was on the pillow. "Is he in trouble?" Nyla asked. "He's handling something." "Is it about the man with the pictures on his phone?" Zara looked at her niece, 9 years old, holding a secret she hadn't been asked to explain and carrying it with the precision of someone 3 times her age. "What man, baby?" "I told Mr. Seojin. He told me not to tell you yet, but I think yet is over." Zara listened. Nyla told her everything. The phone, the photos, the stairs, the alley, the window, Taehyun's name, the wrong laugh. Zara's blood went cold. Not from fear. from the recognition that the danger had been sitting at the counter, drinking coffee every morning while her nieces ate breakfast 10 feet away. She pressed her back against the wall between the beds, one hand on Bree's ankle, one hand in Nyla's. "We're going to stay right here, and everything is going to be fine." Nyla looked at her. "You pressed your lips together." "I know. This time, I'm choosing to believe it anyway." Downstairs, Victor Ree walked through the front door like he owned the air inside the building. Two men flanked him. They were younger than Sojin's security, sharper suits, harder eyes. They scanned the restaurant and positioned themselves at the door. Victor sat across from Sojin. He unbuttoned his jacket, placed his hands flat on the table, a mirror of his nephew's posture. Family resemblance expressed through gesture, not genetics. "You look tired, nephew." "I look the way I need to look." Victor smiled. Thin, a line drawn across his face without reaching his eyes. "I was surprised by your call, pleasantly." "I imagine. Myung-hee tells me you've been making emotional decisions." "My mother tells you a lot of things." "She's concerned, as am I." Victor glanced around the restaurant, the dark booths. The counter where Hae-won kept the panic button next to the kimchi. The security monitors visible through the open office door. This was always going to be a conversation, Seo-jin. Whether you initiated it or I did. I preferred that you did. It suggests clarity. Clarity about what? About the future of this organization. About whether you intend to lead it or inhabit it. Victor leaned forward, 1 inch. For 3 years, you've been present but not engaged. Revenue is down, operations have thinned. Your men are loyal, but loyalty without direction becomes inertia. I've watched this, patiently. Because you are my sister's son, and because Yuna's death earned you a measure of grace that I would not extend to anyone else. Grace. Seo-jin repeated the word like it was a coin he was testing for weight. Grace has a shelf life, nephew. Mine has expired. Seo-jin picked up the glass of water, drank, set it down. The gesture was deliberate. A man who controls the pace of the room, controls the room. You sent a man to offer money to the woman upstairs. Victor didn't blink. I sent an option. You sent surveillance to my alley at 3 in the morning. I sent awareness. You turned Taehyun. For the first time, something behind Victor's expression shifted. Not surprise, recalculation. The realization that the board had changed while he wasn't looking. You know about Taehyun. I know about everything, uncle. That's the difference between grief and stupidity. I've been one. Never the other. Victor sat back, his hands remained flat on the table, his men by the door shifted weight but didn't move. Then you know what I'm proposing. You're not proposing, you're positioning. You want the east side. You want the shipping routes, you want the gambling rooms. And you want me to step aside quietly because grief has made me soft. Hasn't it? Seo-jin was quiet for a moment. He turned the glass of water on the table. 1 rotation. The water didn't spill. 3 years ago, my daughter died in a fire while I was in this restaurant, at this table, doing the work that you're now telling me I've abandoned. His voice was low, even. Every word placed like a stone in a wall. I reached into that fire, and I pulled out nothing. I burned my hand down to the tendons, holding nothing. And every day since, I've woken up and come to this restaurant and sat at this table and run this operation with a hand that doesn't close all the way because the nerve damage starts at the wrist. He held up his left hand, open. The scar tissue gleamed under the overhead light. His ring finger and pinky didn't extend fully. They curled slightly inward, a permanent fist he couldn't release. You think that's weakness? He lowered the hand. That's the hand of a man who reached into fire for something he loved. What have you reached for, Uncle? What have you ever reached for that burned you? Victor's expression didn't change, but his breathing did. One beat longer on the inhale, Seo-jin caught it. Here's what's going to happen, Seo-jin said. Taehyun's access has been revoked as of 2 hours ago. His codes are changed, his accounts are frozen. He'll find out in the morning, you'll find out now. Victor's jaw tightened. The man you sent to the alley at 3 a.m. has been identified. His name, his address, and his vehicle registration are in a file that's currently sitting in 2 locations. One of them is my safe, the other is not. Seo-jin let that settle. The woman upstairs, the children upstairs, are not leverage. They're not strategy, they're not a pressure point. They're under my protection, and my protection has not declined.
It has focused.
Victor stared at his nephew. The restaurant was silent. The security men by the door breathed in unison. You're making a mistake. I've made one mistake in my life, Uncle. I was in this building instead of in my house when the wiring failed. Every decision since then has been precise. He stood. This conversation is over. The organization is mine. It was my father's before me. It will remain mine. If you test that again, the file in my safe goes to a location that will end your retirement plans. Victor stood slowly, buttoned his jacket. His movements were careful, measured. The movements of a man who had just discovered that the wall he'd been leaning against was electrified. Myung-hee won't accept this. My mother will accept what I tell her, as she always has. Victor walked to the door. His men opened it. He stopped in the frame. The woman, Zara. She's changed you. No, she reminded me of something I forgot. What? That the building matters more than the fire. Victor left. The door closed. The cars pulled away. Seo-jin sat back down, alone, the glass of water still on the table. His burned hand flat on the surface. His jaw was locked. His eyes were dry. But his shoulders, for the first time in 3 years, dropped. Not in defeat, in release. The way a man's body lets go when it realizes the thing it's been bracing for has already happened and the walls are still standing. Haewon appeared from the kitchen. She'd been there the entire time, behind the door. Listening. A kitchen knife in one hand that she hadn't been aware she was holding. She set it on the counter. Walked to the table, placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. Black. No sugar, no milk. Your father would have said the same thing. I know. He also would have hit Victor. I know that too. She picked up the glass of water and replaced it with the coffee and went back to her kitchen without another word. Seo-jin drank the coffee, then he walked upstairs. Knocked on the door. 3 soft knocks, the pattern they'd agreed on. The deadbolt turned. Zara opened the door. Behind her, Nyla was sitting up in bed. Bree was asleep with the rabbit. Zara looked at his face, read it the way she read everything. It's done? It's done. Is he gone? Gone. Is Taehyun handled, not harmed, removed? She studied him. Looking for the thing underneath the answer, the cost, the weight, whatever he'd spent in that room that he wouldn't get back. Are you okay? He leaned against the doorframe, his shoulder pressed against the wood. The posture of a man who had been holding himself upright for 3 years and was finally allowing himself to lean. I made my father's stew tonight. I held a 5-year-old against my chest. I sat across from a man who wanted to take everything I have, and I told him no. He paused. I'm better than okay. Nyla spoke from the bed. Did you win? Sojin looked past Zara to the 9-year-old with the white beads and the detective novels and the surveillance instincts of someone who'd been keeping watch her entire short life. We won, because you told me about the phone. Nyla's face opened, not a smile yet, but the architecture of one, the foundation being poured. I'm a good detective. You're the best detective. Better than the one in your book. She doesn't have real cases. No, she doesn't. Zara stepped into the hallway, pulled the door partly closed behind her. Nyla's eyes stayed on them for a moment, then she lay back down. Satisfied. Safe. In the hallway, the overhead light buzzed. The cedar smell of the stairwell drifted up. Zara and Seojin stood a foot apart. Your uncle. Will he stay gone? He'll stay in his lane, the file ensures that. And your mother? My mother will come around. Not quickly, not easily. But she'll come around. What makes you sure? Because tomorrow, I'm going to call her and tell her to come see the girls. Not the situation. The girls. Nyla reading books in the booth, Bree drawing houses on printer paper. She lost a granddaughter. She's been filling that hole with control. When she sees them, really sees them, the control won't be enough anymore. Zara was quiet. She looked at the wall, at the pencil marks. Yuna. 4 years. The last measurement of a life that stopped too soon. Sojin. It was the first time she'd said his name without a question behind it. Just the name. Placed in the air between them like an offering. Yes. I'm going to get my nursing degree. I'm going to get a real apartment. I'm going to stand on my own feet. For the girls. For me. I know. I'm telling you because I need you to understand that whatever this is between us, it doesn't work if I owe you everything. You don't owe me anything. I owe you a meal, a room, a lawyer, a dress, security cameras, and a door that my niece walked through when every other door was locked. Sojin looked at her. The hallway light cast shadows under his cheekbones and lit the silver at his temples. And for one moment, he didn't look like a man who ran an empire. He looked like a man standing outside a room where a dead girl's height marks lived on the wall, trying to figure out how to deserve what was being offered to him. Zara. Yeah. I've spent 3 years maintaining a room for a child who wasn't coming back. I kept the sheets clean. I kept the lamp working. I measured air that nobody breathed. His voice was low, rough. The words were coming from somewhere deep, and they were arriving damaged. Then 2 girls in funeral dresses sat on my sidewalk, and the room had people in it again. And I didn't know if that was healing or betrayal. Healing Yuna's space or replacing her? It's neither. What is it? It's a room, with beds. And 2 girls who needed somewhere to sleep. It's not a memorial and it's not a replacement. It's just what it is right now. She paused. And right now is enough. He exhaled. Long, slow. The breath of a man setting down something he'd been carrying so long it had fused to his hands. Okay. Okay. They stood in the hallway, 1 foot apart. The deadbolt unlocked behind them. 2 girls sleeping on the other side, a restaurant below them, a city outside. And between them, a space that was no longer empty. Not filled, not complete. Just no longer empty. Which, after everything, was enough to build on. 3 weeks later, Myung-hee came to the restaurant. She brought a bag from a department store. Inside were 2 dresses. One for a 9-year-old. One for a 5-year-old. They were expensive. Impractical. The kind of dresses a grandmother buys when she doesn't know what size a child wears, but knows that the gesture has to be bigger than the apology she can't bring herself to say. Bree tried hers on immediately. It was too long. She didn't care. She spun in the restaurant until the fabric flared out around her like a bell, and Myung-hee watched from the counter stool with her purse clutched in her lap and her jaw tight, and her eyes doing something they hadn't done in a very long time. Nyla tried hers on and stood still. She looked at the old woman who had called them outside guests, who had said things with pauses that were louder than words, who had walked out with her gold-clasped bag and left a room cold behind her. Nyla walked to Myung-hee. She stopped in front of the stool. She looked up. "Thank you for the dress." Myung-hee looked down at the girl. The white beads, the old eyes, the chin that lifted the same way Zara's did. "You're welcome. Your son is a good person." Myung-hee's jaw worked. Something moved behind her face. Tectonic, slow. "Yes," she said. "He is. He misses Yuna." The name landed in the restaurant like a stone in a cathedral. Myung-hee's hand tightened on her purse. Her nostrils flared. Her eyes filled. Not spilled, filled, held. "We all miss Yuna." Nyla nodded. Then she did something that nobody expected. She took Myung-hee's hand. The old woman's fingers were cool and stiff and heavy with rings. Nyla held them anyway. She would have liked Bree. Bree makes everyone laugh. Myung-hee looked at Bree, spinning in a too-long dress in the middle of a restaurant with a stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. She looked at this small, careless joy spinning in a circle, and her grip on Nyla's hand tightened, and her chin dropped, and the tears that had been held released. 1, 2. She wiped them fast. But they'd fallen, and Nyla had seen them, and Nyla understood that some walls come down not in crashes, but in drops. Sojin watched from the kitchen doorway. Zara stood beside him. Their shoulders were 2 inches apart. "Told you," he said. "You didn't tell me anything. Nyla did all the work." "She usually does." 6 months later, Zara passed her nursing certification exam. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment 14 blocks from the restaurant. Close enough to walk. Far enough to stand on her own floor. Sojin offered to pay the deposit. She declined. She'd saved it herself. 3 months of extra shifts. 3 months of Haewon watching the girls while Zara studied at the kitchen table after closing. The apartment had locks that worked. It had 2 bedrooms. It had a window in the living room that faced east and caught the morning light. On the wall beside the girls' bedroom door, Zara made a mark in pencil. Nyla. 9 years, 7 months. Below it. Bree. 5 years, 4 months. Nyla looked at the marks. She touched them with her fingertip. Like Yuna's wall. Like Yuna's wall. But these ones keep going. Every Sunday, they went to the restaurant for dinner. Sujin cooked his father's stew. Haewon made juke. Bree sat on the counter and helped by eating half the ingredients before they made it into the pot. Nyla read in the booth. She was on her 14th detective novel. She'd started writing her own mystery stories in a notebook Mrs. Kang had given her. Myung-hee came every other Sunday. She brought fruit. She sat at the counter. She didn't say much, but she watched Bree spin, and she listened to Nyla read. And once, exactly once, she reached out and straightened a bead in Nyla's braid that had twisted sideways. Nyla let her. On the wall of the room upstairs, the pencil marks stayed. Yuna. 4 years. They would always stay. Sojin didn't cover them, didn't paint over them. The room was empty now, but the marks remained. Not a memorial, not a wound, just evidence that a girl named Yuna had lived, and been measured and loved by a father who kept reaching into fire long after the flames went out. Bree's drawing stayed on the refrigerator. 5 stick figures, a house with no lock, flowers, a yellow sun with a face, and a tall figure with a line on his hand, who stood next to the door as if he'd been standing there all along, as if he'd always been waiting for someone small enough to draw him back into a family. If this story made you feel something, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Share your thoughts in the comments and inspire others. Because sometimes, the people who save us are the ones we never expected. And sometimes, the door that opens when every other one is locked is the one that leads you home.